is live.
We are live.
Yep.
All right, sweet. Okay, good morning, good evening, good afternoon to anybody who's watching us live right now or are going to be viewing this later on. This is our fourth panel discussion for the STEMPeers Global Conference 2020. And the overall theme of this conference has been to bring in STEM scholars at different academic levels. So we have had a panel with undergraduates, we have a panel focused on the graduate students, and we also had a panel focused on postdoctoral students who are interested in going into or transitioning into industry. And the idea is to have a discussion between the panelists and the experts, the ones who have already done this journey, and talk about the challenges or the confusions that one face when they're trying to make that decision of where to go next, or if they already have it in mind, how to go through that, what steps they should be taking. So this panel, we are focusing on building a career in academia post-postdoc. And we have a diverse group of panelists and experts from different parts of the world. We have USA here, we have India, we have Ireland, but she also has a very interesting journey prior to that. We'll come to that later. And then this session is going to be moderated by Cheyenne, who is
Hello.
currently a postdoctoral researcher at Weill Cornell Medicine of Cornell University. He completed his PhD from North Carolina State University, where he worked on structural determination of protein kinases. Cheyenne is interested in understanding the structure and functional implications of membrane proteins in host immune response. And in future, he plans to work on virus architecture. So when he's not in the lab, he enjoys watching football, and he says it is not soccer, and in reading novels. All right, so it's all yours, Cheyenne.
Uh, Thank you, Shoini, for the nice introduction. So welcome all of you to STEMPeers Global Conference 2020, the virtual edition. And we have our, hello, Saurav. Hello. Hi. So who are watching all over the world, different time zones. So right now we will be discussing about transition from postdocs to academia. In the morning, we had an excellent session where we discussed about the journey of STEM scholars from postdocs, how they can transition into industry. So now in this panel discussion, we have been joined by 4 postdocs who aspire to be faculties and set up their own labs. And then we have been joined by 2 excellent faculties here who are the expert panelists. And they have seen everything, done this journey, and they have established their own lab. So without further delay, I would like to all of you to introduce yourself. First, I'll go to the postdoc panelist. How about Alessia? Why don't you introduce yourself, give us a brief introduction about yourself?
Sure. My name is Alessia. I'm currently a second-year postdoc at Syracuse University. I study how hormones and aging affects different learning and memory systems currently. And then I did my PhD at Arizona State University, where my dissertation focused on optimizing the delivery of hormones to the brain so that we can maximize the cognitive benefits while minimizing undesired peripheral burden. And my ultimate goal is to go into academia, so hence why I'm here.
Nice, nice. How about Maria?
Sure, yes. So my name is Maria. I'm originally from Spain, and I did my PhD in Spain, in Madrid. And after that, I moved to Frankfurt in Germany, where I did a quite long postdoc. And I studied the communication between the vessels and the neurons during brain development. It was quite a long postdoc, but I had 2 children during that postdoc, so I think it was still quite productive. And currently, I'm a Marie Curie Fellow in Ireland, in Cork, in APC Microbiome Ireland Institute. And my interest is about how the gut microbiota in early life influences this neurovascular communication that I studied also during my postdoc. And I'm also currently writing some applications for having my own independent research.
Nice, nice. Would like to go to Megan.
Hi, I'm Megan. I did my PhD at Penn State University. I studied, that was pretty recently, I defended in April. I studied development of GnRH neurons, and now I'm about 4 years into my, or 4 months in my postdoc at Loyola in Chicago, studying the effects of microRNAs on the aging brain, focusing on women and estrogen regulation.
Okay, thank you, thank you. And we'd like to go to Saurav, if you can briefly introduce yourself.
Hello everyone. I did my PhD from NIPGR, National Institute of Plant Genome Research, New Delhi. In my PhD, I worked on plant proteomics on stress physiology, especially abiotic stress. And after my PhD in my postdoc, I have switched field to bioinformatics, and now I am studying in Institute of Genomics and Integrative Biology, New Delhi, CSIR IGIB, where I am working on finding various plant metabolites which can interact with the human pathogens and can be a part of future drug discovery.
Great, great. Now moving on to the expert panelist, Vaishnavi, if you just could give us a brief introduction.
Hello, everybody. I am an assistant professor at the Center for Biosystem Science and Engineering at the Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore. So prior to joining as an assistant professor at IISc, I was in the same department. I had something called an Inspire Faculty Award, which is what I used to start my own group at IISc. 3 years into that, I transitioned to becoming an assistant professor. In the lab, we focus on understanding cellular organization across different scales, from single molecules to whole organelles. And we do quantitative cytoskeletal biology. That's how I'd like to phrase that. But that's our research focus, and happy to be here today.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And Tostan, if you just give us the brief introduction.
Okay, I have a rather nonlinear career path. So I am now an assistant professor in the physics department at Kent State University, just in Ohio, south of Cleveland. So I studied chemistry first and did my PhD in Frankfurt too. I wonder if I've overlapped with Maria, but I'm not sure. After my PhD, I went to Harvard to do a postdoc at the Wyss Institute for Biologically Inspired Engineering for almost 3 years, 2.5 years. And then I went to Dresden, back to Germany, where I became an independent group leader. So this is a complicated thing in the German system. So you're not professor, and it's a non-tenure track position, and so you have all the duties of a professor but don't have a career path, so it's not really a great thing. So I would tell everyone, stay out of Germany if you want to start a career. Anyways, so after 5.5 years over there, I was not sure if I would ever stay in academia or not, so I was almost preparing to become a teacher or go to industry. But then I got this position at Kent State University in the physics department, surprisingly. And now I'm here and building up my group, and it's already running well. And in my lab, we're studying DNA nanostructures. Now we're building some biomimetic system to study membrane proteins embedded in a ring of DNA filled with lipids. And we want to do single molecule cryo-electron microscopy of membrane proteins in the future.
Nice, nice. Thank you very much, all of you. And now moving on to the panel discussion, I will initiate some of the questions, and then I'd open the floor to all the panelists. They can have questions, they can ask, and if the experts have any suggestions, feel free to give them. Okay, so first I would like to go to the expert panelist. So let's start with Vaishnavi. If you can just give us a brief overview of your career trajectory, the journey you have from academia to transitioning into your independent lab.
Yeah, so I started off taking biology at the undergraduate level. So I did a dual degree in biology and computer science, two very different things, but it actually has served me well right now. But I went to BITS Pilani and I was the first batch of the Goa campus. I took up biology and computer science and graduated with a master's in biological sciences and a BE in computer science. At the end of that stint, I was quite certain I wanted to do a PhD. But the last, as is common for most courses in India, the last year you typically spend doing research. So I had to do an entire year of research because I had two different degrees. I did one of those at the National Center for Biological Sciences in Bangalore, worked with Veronica Rodriguez. The other one, I took up an internship at Microsoft Research India, where I worked on the computer science aspect of my degree. And also combined it with biology, in fact, because I ended up working on building a programming language for expressing biology protocols. So that was a very interesting stint. And while I was doing this, the final semester of my undergraduate studies, of course, I wanted to go to the US, as all of us typically want to. Applied to a bunch of places. And sadly, that was the year, this was 2009, which is when the economy collapsed in the US and elsewhere in the world. And so it was, I didn't really get into a program which was going to be able to fund me. And so that was not an option for me to do that at that point in time. So I took a year and stayed at Microsoft Research India, finished up the work, published it. And then I had become totally disillusioned with the US PhD system. So I decided I was going to apply only to European labs and apply to a few EPFL, ETH, EMBL, Max Planck in Dresden, of course, which is where I eventually ended up doing a PhD. I really liked the interview process at the Max Planck in Dresden, and I think that was something that I did enjoy quite a bit. It was a week-long process where they fly you in, you get to talk to people that you'd potentially like to work with, their lab members as well. At the end of a week, of the interview week, you get to know if you're in or out, and you also know whose lab you're going to be in. So I thought that process was very nicely done, and I was lucky enough to be chosen by Eva Tolic, who I worked with eventually for my PhD. So I had a great time doing my PhD. I think I learned a lot, and I made friends for life. That's something I really do value. At the end of, so the PhDs in Germany, of course, are short, fairly short. So about 3 years into my PhD, I had completed everything that was required for me to submit my thesis. So this was in 2010 that I joined my PhD. In 2013, in March, I had my final thesis advisory committee meeting where I told my advisory members that I was going to submit my thesis, and they were fine with that. And then they asked me, "What are you going to do next?" So my wedding was scheduled the following month in April. I said, "I'm going to go get married now, and I'm not quite sure what I want to do in the future." I didn't quite know at the time if I wanted to be in academia, and I said, "I'm going to think about it." And essentially, I went back to India, got married, and I wrote my thesis from India. Eva is super nice, and she is totally cool with that. So essentially, I ended up writing my thesis from India and submitted it. But it took a while for my exam to be scheduled. So I submitted my thesis in July of that year in 2013. But it turned out that I couldn't have my defense until January of the following year, which was in 2014. So during this time, what I ended up doing was I took up a bridging postdoctoral appointment at the National Center for Biological Sciences at Jeetu's lab, Satyajit Mayer's lab. And of course, I had a small project going on there. I defended my thesis in Jan. Prior to that, earlier, I think end of 2013, I'd applied to a program that I'd just come across, which was the Inspire Faculty Award. So I had a few ideas stemming from my PhD at the Max Planck, where I looked at single molecule dynein imaging and how dynein's activity was regulated. And I had a few ideas I'd wanted to explore. But it was hard for me to find a lab that was going to be able to give me the freedom to explore these ideas while I was not going to be working on the core theme of the lab that I was going to be part of. So I ended up thinking about also applying to the Inspire Faculty Fellowship. I applied, and I surprisingly also got it. And remember, this is without me having proper postdoctoral experience. And so I had to do quite a bit of thinking about whether I really wanted to start up a group without having done a real postdoc. And I think that was where my mentors, Eva and my thesis advisory committee members, Joe Howard specifically, I think they had a huge influence on this. They had a lot more confidence in me than I had in myself. And so gave me the push that I required to actually start my group at the Indian Institute of Science. And the way I got into Indian Institute of Science was also quite interesting because I applied to attend the Young Investigator meetings, which are held by India Bioscience. And I happened to just have gotten the award, and there was going to be a meeting the following month. And so I went to the Young Investigator meeting. Ended up speaking to people, representatives of different institutes. IISc worked very well. And this was this new department. In fact, when I joined IISc, there was no Center for Bioscience and Engineering. In fact, it was called the Bioengineering Program. It was a PhD program and hadn't yet become a department, but they had some space. And essentially, I joined as an Inspire faculty fellow. So did another colleague of mine, Shilpi. So the both of us essentially had all the freedom in the world. I think I really enjoyed the fact that we had all the freedom in the world, a little bit of money. And so we got working. So this was in 2014, June. And thankfully, things worked out all right. I did apply to a few other grants. Money came in, hired some students. We got working and things worked out all right. 3 years down the line, after having published from my independent group, I applied for a regular position at the Indian Institute of Science. And that worked as well. And it's been 3 years since I've become assistant professor at the Indian Institute of Science. And yeah, so it hasn't been straightforward trajectory, but I don't think I would have changed much, to be honest. It's been a long, I don't know, I've been speaking for a while now, so maybe I'll keep quiet for a bit.
Thank you. That was really interesting. It was really interesting journey. Thank you. Thank you very much. And I would like to go to Tostan, if you can enlighten us about your journey.
So, I mean, I've already given you the broad overview. I think what is probably most interesting to many people is why it went towards academia and not to industry or some other thing or governmental position or so. So I think the idea to stay in research, I had that pretty early on. So that was the reason why I wanted to start to study in the first place. I was really excited about research. I always enjoyed experiments, doing experiments and doing research in the lab, and had a couple of internships here and there as a student, as an undergrad. I really enjoyed that. I also went to Spain for one semester to Oviedo. And did real hardcore research there, not the usual Erasmus partying, but it was really a 50-hour lab work, real research. So I really enjoyed that. And then I chose a position for a PhD with a person where I felt I would have the most confidence in, that it would just match. I had several offers, and I just felt this is a person that I like to work with. And I think this is a general recommendation that I would give to everyone. If you don't feel well in a certain constellation or in a certain environment, then it's not going to work. So that was the person that I chose. I really liked him, and he gave me all the freedom in the world to just do stuff, publish papers, he said. That's the most important thing. Do interesting stuff. And I really just designed projects from scratch. I had all the freedom and the money that I needed to do that. I supervised other students. I co-supervised postdocs during my PhD. And that was, I loved it. So that was the period where I really decided, okay, it's going to be an academic career. And as an academic, you have to have the imagination and the creativity to see what could be an interesting path in research. And I think I had the support and the freedom to develop this very early on, and I had the confidence that I'm eventually able to come up with interesting research projects and lead a group. So I looked around for postdocs, had several offers, and I took the one again with a person where I felt this could be a good match, and it was also a good place. So I mean, that certainly helps on your CV if you're not in a completely unknown institution. But so yeah, that helped. And then during my postdoc, I applied for several positions, mainly in Europe. So I had also an offer from Denmark and Germany. And I took this one in Dresden, which is a fantastic institution. So when I sounded negative about Germany, it's not about the research that people are doing over there and being an undergrad or a grad student or even postdoc. So that's great. It's just this constellation that I was this independent group leader, but without really a career path. So they made it sound, maybe we can make this a tenure track position. There is maybe an option, and it's just, if you don't have this black on white, then it's not going to happen. So yeah, by the end of the 5 years that this cluster of excellence existed, I had to look around for other options. I had written many applications all over Europe, mainly. My family and I, we wanted to stay in Europe, but nothing materialized. And so in the end, I looked a little bit further, and there was this position at Kent State coming up. I had to look this up on the map where Kent State is, and applied here. And again, it was very nice. It was a very nice experience. It's a small city, and yeah, I really enjoy being here and having the freedom now to again continue doing research, and hired very good students, a good part of it from India again, and yeah, I really enjoyed that.
Thank you. Thank you. It was really nice to hear from you. And I would like to go to the postdocs now. And so my broad overview question to all of you, like you are aspiring, want to become a faculty. Why do you think that's the career path you want to be in? So I would like to start with Maria. If you just want to give us like why you want to become a faculty, what do you see in that career path?
So I think my main motivation is because I have this idealistic view of science. Just, I enjoy research, I enjoy finding things, and this has been there for very long. That's my main motivation. It's true that at some point in the past, I was a bit disappointed with science, because there are all these aspects about publishing that, it's a lot of pressure that if you don't publish this much or this much impact factor. And so for quite a while, I was really thinking, no, I don't think I want to continue in academia because I somehow don't fit. I don't see myself as a group leader. But then at some point, this idea changed again. And I thought, I still have, I really like science. I enjoy it. And just because, maybe I'm not like the typical group leader one day that is really, I don't know, maybe super confident or very, very, I don't know, this kind of personality that I think I don't have, but I still think every personality can become, a good group leader in one way or other. So somehow that changed in me. And then this motivation for science and for enjoying research kind of won over. So that's how, it became clear for me.
Thank you. Thank you very much. How about Alessia, if you can give us your input?
Sure. So one of the things that I really enjoy about academia is working with students and mentoring. And that's kind of the rewarding aspect of it that I find for myself. So really seeing both on the undergraduate and now on the graduate level students that I work with and having them kind of succeed within their own experiments or their own professional goals. I've really enjoyed kind of guiding them and helping, just supporting them through it. And then the second part that kind of helped me decide academia versus something else is I enjoy coming up with ideas and the proposals, the research questions, and hashing it out. I've been working on them with my mentors right now, but just kind of hashing out the details, the correct questions, or like the most feasible questions, what's most relevant to, for my project, it's women's health. So just kind of figuring all of those out and getting really excited about that part.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'd like to go to Saurav, if you can tell us why you want to go to academia.
Yeah. Time I was really excited about how things work, and I was always curious how we can push whatever is not in front of you. So I chose the biotech stream, and then continued after my master's. I kept studying many people, and then I realized I actually want to do more, and then I joined my PhD. And during my PhD and postdoc, I have developed several theories, which you like. It's not in your capacity to do your main project work you are having. Apart from that, you the extra idea which you want to work on, that you can continue. So I have developed several theories on working, like a person can work on three levels in a project. One is a bird eye viewer, which have the who have the vision. One is the detailer, which can take care of every detailed part, and one is the middle manager who correlates every project to uh, become the visionary, the idea the visionary has. So one person can work only on two levels, and the group leader should be the visionary always. The idea should come from the group leader, and he will be the leading part of the project. So I have always evaluated myself as the visionary, as well as one more person, either the detailer or the middle manager, but I am not able to do all three parts. There are very less people in the world which have been working at all three levels, and I am not sure I will be able to do that. So in this scenario, I feel I'll be working best if I have a team which can come up with the rest of the part which I cannot do. And therefore I feel ki I'll be better doing my research if I have a team, and that's how I think I should actually be working as a group leader, or in future some kind of small project with my team. That's it.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It was interesting to hear from you. And I would like to go to Megan. Why you want to go to academia?
Yeah, sure. So I guess I should point out that I'm still pretty new to the postdoc. So I am keeping an open mind in industry as well, but academia is, I guess, more of my interest. Just because a lot of the things that people have already pointed out, being able to mentor graduate students is a lot of what I'm doing now, and it feels really nice to give some input and direction to their studies, and sort of being able to structure your own day around mentorship and your own experiments and your writing. I think sort of participating in just overseeing your entire day. So like the entire project, right? So the writing, making the figures, doing the actual experiments. I don't know if just, doing like a career in science writing would be suitable for me, because I'd want to get my hands in all aspects of the science. So.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. And now I would like to open the floor for questions and discussions. If you have any questions, feel free to ask the experts, and the experts are feel free to give any inputs and suggestions. And we will also have questions from the audience. And in time to time, I'll keep on posting those questions. If you have any questions, feel free to ask the questions.
I'll go first.
Yeah, sure.
How did you guys establish your own separate line of research from like moving from postdoc to academia? And were there any issues with your mentor in that process?
Okay, so anybody feel free to answer. Yeah, I don't want to
go
point to
first,
anything.
Tostan? I think
You are muted.
Oh, you want me to go first? Okay. Is that right? Yeah. Okay. All right. Yeah. So yeah, that's an important question, of course, to address when you start a group. So I think I had been thinking about this quite a bit. Of course, all of us get training in one particular aspect of science, and that is our expertise. So what I ended up doing was to have a base that relied on my expertise, but asked the question that was not necessarily directly what the lab that I had trained in was doing. So, for instance, one of the things that I was doing, and in fact, there is another question that I had embarked upon, which is a long-term extension of my PhD project. But I'd spoken about this to my PhD mentor, and we had a very clear idea that I was going to do this. So she was totally on board, and this was fine. So that was one thing, of course, an extension of what you do, but perhaps not exactly the same question and a different system, for example. This is what I ended up doing. So for instance, I studied dynein regulation at the single molecule level in yeast during a specific process in yeast cells. One of the projects that I'm continuing to do in my independent group is to actually understand dynein regulation in a more complicated system, mammalian cells, and then also different in a different context. So this was a discussion I'd had with Eva at the time of my graduation from my PhD. The other thing I ended up, the other avenues that I've taken in my lab include using the skill set that I developed during my PhD, which was quantitative cell biology. So imaging, microscopy, image processing, to ask questions that are quite different from what my PhD lab did. So for example, one thing that we started doing is understanding mitochondria, microtubule interactions. So cytoskeleton, of course, is something that features quite prominently in our research. But we asked a very different question using the same kind of tools that you need to answer the other questions that I'd had in my PhD, but moved it to a very different area. And I think that really helped distinguish what I'd done previously to what I'm doing right now. So yeah, essentially my personal experience has been to use your skills to the fullest possible, but answer a different question that is related in some way to what you did previously.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion. And Tostan?
Yes, for me, it was very nonlinear. I had very many interests. I studied chemistry and did some more bio-related work later on, and now I'm in the physics department. So the unifying theme so far for me has been working with DNA and using DNA as a building material to build artificial structures and to do some interesting things with it. So it is more of a tool building, tool development type of research that I have been doing since my PhD. And with this, the big danger was, and this is also the trap that I fell into in hindsight, was that there's too many things that you can do. And being in Harvard, it's very easy to be distracted by, or to have so many more ideas than you can possibly do in your career. Being in Dresden, I was also very lucky that I could attract very many extremely talented students from all over the world with very different backgrounds, from chemistry, physics, biology, nanotechnology, pharmacology, computer science. Did I miss something? Physics, obviously. And so I had a very diverse lab and had very diverse projects, and that went pretty well. And we published papers that I'm very proud of, and it was very productive. But to find a job as a faculty member and to convince a hiring committee, this is maybe a little bit too much to swallow. And so I think things have materialized a little bit more into getting a real position is when I decided, okay, I can't do all of these things at the same time, and I can't overwhelm the hiring committee with 25 different ideas. I need to narrow things down a little bit. And so when you have an overarching problem, an overarching really interesting problem that you want to solve, or a technology that you can work on, so that is easier to sell, and it's easier to also to get grants when you have a little bit more narrow, not overly broad interest. So when I narrowed things down, and these are the 2-3 things that I want to work on, then it's also a little bit easier for hiring committees to decide, yeah, this person fits into the department, and this is what we're doing. So that was for me, this is a very individual thing that I'm interested in too many things. So this was probably one of the most important steps that brought me over this hurdle in getting a faculty position.
Thank you. Any more questions? from the postdocs?
I have a question,
Sure.
because I'm kind of trying to figure it out myself as well. How did you guys know that you are ready, or at least you could try being an independent researcher as opposed to getting more training or going to another postdoc, expanding on your skill set? So what kind of facilitated your decision to apply for faculty jobs as opposed to apply for more training positions?
Honestly, I think I was just being very naive. I didn't quite know if I was going to make it in science, but I thought, okay, so the grant that I'd gotten was a 5-year term, had a 5-year term. And if I'd failed miserably, it would have been a 5-year period and I would have been out of academia. But honestly, I think, I don't think I have a real answer here. Maybe I let Tostan actually take this.
Take the best opportunity that you get. I mean, if you get an offer for a faculty position right after PhD, take it. I mean, nobody from my colleagues is perfect, and nobody knows everything, and it's a learning process until you retire, and even after that. So, I don't know, if you get a grant. Obviously, you're going to take that grant. You apply to positions where you feel you have at least a little bit of a chance. Apply to faculty positions as soon as you can. And if you don't get it, well, apply for the next training position. But that has other dangers. So if you have one training position after the other, at some point you're too late. You're too old in many systems. And that I would not do 3, 4, 5 different postdocs. So that's maybe a second one if you really feel it really gives you a new skill set that you didn't get in one of the first ones. But then there's the question, why didn't you get it in the first one? So I think move on as quick as possible, and you can still learn when you're an assistant professor or a group leader. So apply early. I
agree with what Tostan said. The other thing is that I think when you think you have even a notion of an idea forming for what you'd like to do in your research lab in the future, I think that's a good place to also start. If you already kind of have the basics of what you'd like to do in the future kind of fleshed out, maybe then you are on the way to becoming an independent group leader. So might as well flesh it out completely, apply as soon as you can, like Tostan said, and go for it. And
yeah, I think it comes down if you read.
Yeah. No, I completely agree with what you said, because as you keep learning the entire duration, it's a never-ending process. So it's not that you're ready one day. It's just that you're going to keep learning for a while.
Yes. So if you have a strong idea that you can write an application with and say, this is what I want to do, not only in the next 2 years. This is what hiring committees want to hear. They want to have a plan for the next 10 years or so, or 10, 20 years. They want to see this vision. This is a person that we hire now that can build up a lab and teach and give people a good education, but also somebody who has a vision that is not burned after the first 2 experiments that they propose, but this is really something that has a 10-year prospect of really changing something and being interesting. So that is something that is a message, or there's something that you want to write up, to have this bold long-term vision that could keep a lab busy for many years to come.
Okay. Any more questions? And
I wanted to ask you both if you are still working in the lab, like lab work.
Yeah, for the first 3 years, I was doing at the bench the entire time. It's becoming harder and harder because you have so many other things to do. But ideally, I really want to do experiments on a daily basis. I still manage to get, if the samples are ready, I manage to get some imaging done. I manage to do image processing done. But doing an experiment from start to finish has been quite difficult. But I would like to continue to do this if I can.
I would like to, but it's not happening anymore. So the first 2 years in my time in Dresden, I was still doing something and still had my bench and my sets of pipetters that nobody was allowed to touch other than me. But soon the pipetters got scavenged, and so that was I'm not very good at multitasking, so I can't switch so fast from task to task. And at some point I decided I'm not going to do my own projects anymore, and the group was also too big. At some point I had 7-8 people, and just the supervision of those and teaching and so on, it was just too much, and I couldn't do experiments anymore myself. I went to the lab and helped people and are training new people, especially with some methods that the other students are not really comfortable with yet. So I still do that, and now I had to do that again here in Kent when I built up a lab for the second time. But I don't have my own projects anymore.
I would like to ask a question.
Yeah, sure.
What should we give emphasis on when we are actually we have switched fields from PhD to postdoc, and you feel like connected to both the streams, and you have ideas for both the streams, and you are not sure what you should propose for the work, as you said, to apply for the positions. You should have your own project, unique idea for long-term vision. But we have both ideas in both fields. The work we have done in PhD as well as work we have done in postdoc, but they are very different stream. So what should be the preference, the recent postdoc work or the PhD work, or any suggestion on that?
Very good question.
Yeah, so I mean, this doesn't, of course, this does not come from personal experience, but I would maybe think about it in terms of maybe leveraging both of your experiences from a PhD as well as a postdoc. And perhaps that places you in a very unique situation to be able to combine what you've done in both instances and come up with an idea which nobody else likely has. But this, of course, does not come from personal experience. So I'll leave it to Tostan to talk about this.
Yeah, I have switched fields a lot of times, or it's basically I have done this DNA nanotechnology stuff, and sometimes I call it chemistry, sometimes I call it biophysics, and sometimes I call it DNA nanotechnology. So for me, it was not really completely different. It was just combining aspects from different fields. So if you really have things that are relatively unconnected, I don't know if you can find the connection between the two. So that would put you in a unique position that nobody else can do. So if you're proposing something that 250 other people are proposing, or 250 other labs are working on, that may not fly. So you have to find something which is novel and unique. And if you can find those connections between these seemingly unconnected branches of research, that would be fantastic. If it's not, if you think that's not really possible, then you could also kind of decide on what you want to more focus on, depending on which environment you are in. So if you're in a place, so when I moved to Dresden, that was an electronics center. And there were a lot of people around me that were doing photonics, plasmonics, and that was then a project from all these different ideas that I have. That was one of the main foci that I was proposing over there. So look at the environment, what fits in there, where can you collaborate, and don't try to do something completely unconnected that nobody else in your institution or in your university can relate to, because that would feel you would feel pretty lonely, and then it's also not going to fly. So maybe that's also another consideration based on the environment that you're in, what you want to focus on.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay, we have a question from one of our live viewers, and the question is, what are the key aspects of a faculty job search, and how does one prepare for it?
I can speak for what happens in ISE. Perhaps this
Sure.
is the same for most Indian institutes as well. But essentially what happens is, of course, you apply online on a portal that IISc has created. And you choose departments based on your preference. We get to see your application, of course. So this entails a detailed CV, a research plan, as well as a teaching plan. And essentially what we do is to there's usually a faculty search committee that each department has. All of the members of the faculty search committee get to see your application, and they discuss it at a scheduled time. And typically what happens is we wait for about 10 applications to come through before we do this process. And so we end up discussing the application and understand, first of all, of course, we go by their past record, but we also look at what they want to do in the future, and how this relates to what the department is looking for in terms of area of research. For example, ours is a very interdisciplinary department, Center for Biosystem Science and Engineering. And there are specific areas that we are interested in. And so what we do is then see if the person that will be coming in is, first of all, going to have a nice research fit, like Tostan mentioned, but also with respect to the fact that we are an engineering department, we'd also like to see that they'd have the ability to teach engineering students as well, because that's, of course, another important component of the job. So essentially, that's where the selection process determines whether a person would be suitable to be called for an interview. So once all of these criteria are met, you get contacted to schedule a time for an interview. These days we're doing it online, of course. So this is an hour-long research talk focusing on some of your PhD work and also some of your postdoc work. And the last 10 minutes goes into talking about 10 to 15 minutes to go into talking about what you want to do in the future. And this is, of course, to an open audience. Once this research talk part of the job interview is done, we move on to something called a chalk talk. We, of course, now rely on, again, presentations. It's called a chalk talk, but it's informal, and you do have slides as well. So again, you get go in depth into what you want to do in the future. This is a closed session, typically only open to the department faculty members, where you talk about specifically what you're going to do in a short term as well as in the long term. And go into details on what you'd require for you to do the work, the kind of infrastructure that's necessary, the kind of students that you'd like to take, your teaching plans, and so on. And of course, this is very informal, and there's a lot of back and forth discussion amongst the members of the panel. And essentially at the end of this process, all of the faculty members of the department are consulted, and then collectively it's decided whether we're going to go ahead with somebody's application. So this is where the department's involvement ceases, and then it's taken up by the administration. They also call in external experts to have something called a selection committee meeting, where they also evaluate you. Typically, when the department strongly recommends a candidate, it's 99% through that you're going to be hired. But of course, there's a quality check at the selection committee meeting as well. And once that's done, they recommend your name to be selected, and that's where it ends. But this is the process. It's rather long. It could take between 6 months from your time of application to when you actually get the selection committee to agree, if everything goes according to plan. In my instance, even though I was at IISc when this whole process started and ended, it took 7 months from the time I applied until the time I actually got to become an assistant professor at IISc while I was still there. So you can imagine this can take quite a bit of time. And the issue with some Indian institutes has been that there isn't a lot of back and forth during this process. So I can understand that it could feel like you're yelling into the void when you're asking if you want feedback about the process, or if you want to know what's happened to your application. Sometimes you don't get responses, and that can be quite frustrating. So if you do know somebody at the institute, or you can write to the chair of the department, they typically do respond to your questions. Or if you can get hold of a faculty member that you interacted with during the course of your interview, that will also be quite helpful.
Thank you. Tostan?
Yeah, I think this really depends on where you are. So I've seen the process in different countries now. So by far the fastest was in the States. So I heard about this position probably in mid-May or something like this, or early May, mid-May, something like this. Just asking informally one of the people, do you think this could fit? And they said, oh yeah, but apply quick. So we're having a meeting next week. And we're already inviting the first candidates. I was like, well, okay, I wrote something up and sent it to them. A week after that, I had an invitation for an interview, which was early June. So I flew over, gave my interview, so I can detail on that. And 3 or 4 days after that, I had the offer. So that was super quick. It's not everywhere as quick as that, but it can be. So this entire thing was maybe a month or 6 weeks, hearing about the position and having the offer. In Germany, it would be very different. In Germany, it's a little bit like in India. So you have these all these committees and all these different administrative steps, and in the end, you are a employee of a federal state, so the federal government also has to approve, and this takes forever. So this is at least half a year, if not a year, before you get a position there. So the question was also, what do these committees look at? So the first, obviously, it's your record. If you have 0 publications, then it's not going to fly. If you have few publications, but really interesting, very groundbreaking, it also matters the impact factor, unfortunately. So if you have a Nature and a Cell paper, that could fly. If you just have something, 2 papers in a obscure journal, then this is not going to fly. In my case, I didn't have any of these super high impact factor publications, but I had many solid papers, and so that set the record, I suppose. Then it's the research that is the most important part, probably for a hiring committee. Does the person fit in here in the landscape that we have in this institution? In research initiatives, so you really want to do your homework before you apply somewhere. What research initiatives are there? If there is this big thing and you have not even heard of that big research initiative when you interview there or during your application, that's not going to fly either. So research is super important. And then the teaching is, depending on where you apply to, is somewhere between important to not important. There are institutions where it completely suffices that you don't drop dead if you see a student. Those were not those institutions where I had interviews in. So I also needed to have a vision for teaching and have a credible teaching record also. So I did some teaching while I was a group leader too. So teaching, you have to ask how important that teaching is in that institution. So at Kent State University, it's a state university, and teaching is a very important part here. Yeah, during the interview, it's you give a presentation and a chalk talk. It's the same, I think, everywhere it's the same. You meet faculty members. It is a very, very exhausting marathon. So you also want to prepare very well. You want to look up people's CVs, and you don't have to look up exactly what they work on, but have a vague idea about their fields or so. So that typically takes the entire day. Sometimes it's even 2 days. That is a very exhausting process. And yeah, and then it really depends on the institution and on the country and how fast you get to know the decision.
Yeah, sorry, I also forgot to mention, we do also have one-on-ones with faculty members across the board. So yeah, so that's like Tostan said, it's a 1 day, 2 day process. So that's quite exhausting.
I have 2 questions here. So it's open to all of you since, so the first question is, does having a prior funding history, suppose like Maria is a Marie Curie fellow, and some of my friends have a K99, applying for K99. Also, Vaishnavi was a TST Inspire fellow. Does having a prior history of funding, does that help? So if any of you can answer the question or enlighten some of us to answer this.
Yeah,
Helps
very
for
important.
sure. Helps for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So if especially in Germany, where we have this second step or kind of a second postdoc or group leader type position before you get a faculty position, there it's mandatory. So you need to show that's the next thing. So is your research interesting, but also will there be money for it? And it's difficult to get money these days, and in some countries you have at least a number of positions. In Germany, a professorship typically comes with 1 to staff scientist positions, postdocs or PhDs that are there no matter whether you apply or not. In some institutions like Max Planck, it can be quite a number of positions, but those are the most competitive positions. But in other cases like the US, you get an empty office and then you have to get the money to get your research going. You get a startup package too, but that really depends on how well you negotiate and how much money the school has. But once that startup package is burned and you have bought all the machines that you need, then you need to write grants, and you need to be able to convince people that you can get that money for the research that you're proposing. So yeah, very important. But it depends whether in a postdoc, when you're applying directly after postdoc, it's not mandatory. It helps if you have applied for a grant such as Marie Curie. I had a Humboldt fellowship, so that certainly helps. But I think it's not mandatory. But if you already had a group leader position and then apply for a faculty position, then you need to also show some funding history.
Great. And the second question linked to that funding source is how realistic it is to get a grant in current scenario, US, India, and Europe. Like, what are the grant situations and how easy or tough it is to get a grant nowadays?
I'll speak for India, of course.
Sure.
So, in my experience, it hasn't been impossible to get grants. So I think in my case, I ended up writing not these. So typically what they want to do is to see that you have a plan for what you're going to do. In the 3-year grant cycle, that typically is what you get. For most grants that you get, it's a 3-year cycle. Inspire is a 5-year grant. It's slightly different because it's a faculty award. But most grants have a 3-year term. And what they want to see is that you have a clear idea of what you really want to do. It doesn't have to be super ambitious. It doesn't necessarily need to break the ceiling, but it just has to be research that is novel and that it does promise some output at the end of it. And in my experience, it's been all right in the sense if you write a fairly reasonable grant, you do typically get it. In some instances, of course, it may not happen because of the constraints on the number of grants that can be given in a particular year. But if you do have a sensible idea, it will get funded at some point. But there is an issue with how long these funding cycles are in India. And that can vary depending on what grant you're applying to. It can be as quick, it can have a turnaround time as quick as 3 months. It sometimes takes about a year. And that depends on the grant. And so it'd be good for you to do some research on how long these grant cycles take before you start applying to them. Because for something that will take a year, it's better that you start applying sooner rather than later. But there is money for research, for basic research in India as well. I do basic research, I do fundamental research. And there is money for fundamental research in India. Money is not the issue, but what is an issue is the timing of the grant cycles, as well as when you get the money. So typically the first year that the grant release is rather seamless. Things happen when they're supposed to. What does happen is in the second year, third year, and so on, especially for the DST, DBT run grants, I have had delays of 8 months for me to get the grant. And if you're in an institute where, for instance, my DST Inspire faculty award paid for my salary as well, and of course the research money. In ISC, what you can get is an advance on both the fellowship as well as the research grant. if you're in an institute where you cannot get this, it becomes extremely hard to do anything at all. So I was very fortunate that ISU was able to advance some money to me so that I could be paid a salary as well as have some money for research. But if this doesn't happen, it becomes really difficult. And that still continues to happen, unfortunately. And I think the Indian system really needs to get their act together and get this fixed, because I think several people's careers are at stake when you don't release money on time. So that is one real problem that still exists. But money does exist. It just has to be run properly. The administration has to get its act together.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Tostan, any input?
Yeah, so when I compare the US and Germany, I think the funding rates for the major institutions, NSF and NIH, are 10% or below. So that means you need to apply often and long, and maybe with many different ideas. So far, I had the idea, if you're really trying hard, eventually you are going to get a grant, but you have to apply a lot. And in Germany, the funding rates are a little higher, but some things are different in Germany, so you can't just apply to different funding agencies with the same idea. This is sometimes possible in the US. So yes, bottom line, it is difficult. So far, I haven't gotten a major grant here. I have just joined a year and a half ago over here, and I was building up my lab. So I have written a few grants, and they're in the pipeline. It takes somewhere between 6 to 8 months to hear back. So here you have a startup package, which is supporting the salaries of a postdoc, or maybe even 2 postdocs for a little while, or for PhD students. Here in the US, you also get PhD students kind of for free from the department, because they're in these graduate schools. So it is possible to survive a while, but not for very long if you don't get external funding. So the pressure is there, yes.
Thank you. Thank you very much. 1 hour flew by so quickly. So last time, I would like to ask the postdocs if they have any questions. And then I would like to ask the experts if they have any suggestions or ending note for those postdocs who want to aspiring to go to academia, if you have any suggestions.
Well, I told all my students in Dresden, stay out of academia, and almost nobody took my advice. So some of my students, they're at MIT now, or at Arizona State University, Dresden University, and at Munich, successfully doing postdocs. So only one of my students, he knew already before I gave him that advice that he wanted to go to industry, and he's having a good career over there. You really sacrifice a lot by doing an academic career. It's very long hours, very little private life. You have to have a lot of flexibility and move around the globe sometimes. Being here in the States wasn't the first choice. It was just the second choice. It's turned out to be very nice, but it's a not linear and sometimes very stressful also for the family's career path. So really consider other options too. That's my advice.
Thank you. Vaishnavi?
Yeah, so I think I agree with some parts of what Tostan mentioned. I think it's you've got to expect the unexpected at several junctions along your career. And I think always have a fallback plan in case things don't work out. This could be in your projects, in your experiments, in your career in general as well. Things are uncertain, but there are, of course, perks of also being in academia. The flexibility is something that I really value. And the fact that you can take time off to think about problems. All of these flexibilities that you have in academia, I think, is something that really attracted me to the job. But of course, it's not just about the science. It's about being an administrator, being a financial controller, being ready to also mentor and to teach. And so it's a lot of things balled up into one. And of course, none of us really is trained for this during the time, likely during our postdoc or in our PhD times. And so it's a learning process. And I think it is very rewarding, but things can take unexpected turns when you least expect it. So be prepared and have fun while you're at it if you wanted to be in academia. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much, all of you. Just a little reminder that this was live in YouTube, and tomorrow is our last session of this global conference that is integrating life and professional career all together. So that will be happening tomorrow. And thank you, all of you, for your great discussion. It was really helpful to all our viewers and the aspiring postdocs or PhD students who want to go to academia. Thank you from all of us here at STEMPeers. Good luck in your career choices. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks for moderating, and thank you for the unbiased views. We really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good luck, everyone.
Yeah, good luck.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.